Syncopation is really important for remote teams to get right. We are all individuals stepping into a solo space that connects to a shared space of our remote collaboration. And that means that as individuals, we each have our own rhythms. So if I'm in a different time zone than a colleague, my breakfast time is at a different time than theirs is. And that means that when I am in the mood to get going with work, I'm jazzed up with my first cup of coffee, they might be winding down for the day. And that can create all kinds of feelings of disconnection, disjointedness, and make it really hard to anticipate as an individual what I should be doing and how I should be connecting with who on my team. So syncopation is a dynamic when we don't navigate that stack of solo rhythms with intention, and it can create this feeling. In music, syncopation is when we sort of mix up strong beats with weak beats, and it can feel very disorienting and strange almost. And syncopation as a dynamic in remote teams is when we do similarly. So we each have our own pace and rhythm, and when we stack them on top of each other, it becomes this sort of chaotic, confusing, a little bit disorienting kind of music and bass line that we can't really feel connected to or comfortable within. So to navigate this dynamic, let's start first with what it feels like. So for you, it might feel like your successes aren't visible to the team. So this can mean, for example, that when you have a crescendo within a project, maybe the rest of your team is about to start a project. And it can be really difficult to not have a shared moment of celebration when you complete something big. And if we're not mindful about those kinds of rhythms, that can happen quite frequently. And that leads to you feeling alone in your work. So you may be working with colleagues on projects technically, but are you actually having those shared moments where it feels like the wind down or the start up is happening in the same way, and that you're able to share that sort of human connection and energy of working directly with someone? As a team, it can feel really difficult to collaborate, especially across time zones. This is a really big challenge for distributed teams, particularly ones with time zone spreads that require more asynchronous work. And it can be really hard for people to know what other people are working on. And it ends up sort of back to that sort of feeling alone in your work. It can end up feeling really intimidating to connect to your team rhythms because everyone's kind of doing their own thing, and there's this feeling of individual activity that all kind of piles up to be some type of team activity, but it doesn't feel very good and it doesn't feel very connected to each other. So that's what it looks like if it's a problem. And the main thing to reflect on is to align your team's rhythms. So not have everyone move to the same place, not to have everyone structure their day in the same way, because remote work allows for wonderful freedom in terms of location, in terms of diversity of teams, in terms of nonlinear work days. So we don't want everyone to have to be doing the same thing each day on the same rhythms. But what we want is to think about what types of shared rhythms you can build as a team. So a classic example of this is an annual retreat or an annual planning process where everyone knows that for a period of time you're going to be reflecting on the big questions of your organization, and everybody learns to expect that rhythm. Like, oh, we'll cover that at the retreat, or oh, we'll answer that question when we get to that annual review process. And that's a classic example at the annual sort of cadence, but thinking more specifically about how you can align your team rhythms in different cadences can be a really helpful way of counteracting the syncopation dynamic. So ask yourself, when I think about my rhythms, the first step is to recognize what they are. So for me as an individual, for my team, for my organization, what are my rhythms? So do you have a planning session on Monday morning and a wind down session on Friday afternoon? Maybe that's something you do. Maybe once a quarter you have a check-in with your manager and you talk about what's working and what's not. Maybe you have a performance review every 6 months. And thinking about each of these rhythms, you should then be able to ask the question, are these cadences aligned? And again, alignment isn't perfect alignment because that's not possible, but it's getting a sense of, are they contributing to each other? Are they creating a sort of sense of shared rhythm through the year that can be a predictable way that the team can meaningfully collaborate and feel connected to one another in a shared endeavor?